From the ruins of the Renaissance to a European power, Italy's long road to unification. Welcome to Deep Sight. I am your time navigator, Lawrence Stardust. In previous episodes, we discussed Germany's thousand-year path to unification, the rise of Britain, and the intricate web of the European grandmothers' bloodlines and their connection to the world wars. Today, we turn our gaze southward to Italy. The name Italy derives from the ancient Oscan word vitiliu, meaning land of calves. The ancient Greeks adopted it as Tau Phalamd Alpha, and the Romans later Latinized it into Italia, the name we still use today. Originally, Italy did not refer to the entire peninsula. In the 5th century BCE, Greek writers used it only for the southernmost tip, roughly modern Calabria. Over time, the name expanded northward, and it was not until the Augustan age of the Roman Empire that it became the official designation for the entire Apennine Peninsula, a name that traveled from the toe to the whole boot. When you think of Italy, you might picture the glory of ancient Rome, the brilliance of the Renaissance, or perhaps football, pizza, and romantic Venice. But have you ever wondered why such a civilization that once led Europe failed to form a unified state before the 19th century, much like Germany? How did the mighty Roman Empire decline into a fragmented geographical notion for over 15 centuries? Indeed, for much of the Middle Ages and early modern period, Italy was merely a geographical expression, a patchwork of city-states, duchies, kingdoms, and papal territories, constantly warring and conspiring against one another, eventually falling prey to the rival ambitions of France, Spain, and Austria. From the ashes of the Renaissance to unification in 1870, Italy traversed an extraordinarily long, tortuous, and often humiliating path, a path that would directly determine its precarious status and waffling diplomatic stance on the eve of the First World War. Today, we shall unravel this often overlooked history. Station 1. Twilight of the Renaissance: how Italy fell from Europe's center to the prey of great powers. Before we discuss Italian unification, we must first ask, why did the Renaissance, which once illuminated all of Europe, fade away in Italy? At the end of the 15th century and the beginning of the 16th, Italy was still the richest and most cultured part of Europe. Florence's Medici family sponsored Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. The popes in Rome used the church's wealth to build St. Peter's Basilica. Venetian merchant galleys controlled the Mediterranean's trade arteries. Yet precisely this oozing wealth attracted the covetous eyes of northern powers. In 1494, King Charles VIII of France crossed the Alps and invaded Italy. The so-called Italian Wars dragged on for over 60 years, 1494 to 1559, scorching almost the entire peninsula. The French came and went. The Spanish arrived. And no sooner had they settled than the Holy Roman Empire intervened. Italy's city-states, as fragmented as loose sand, could only oscillate helplessly between the great powers. The most harrowing episode occurred in 1527, when the Spanish and German troops under Holy Roman Emperor Charles V largely out of control sacked Rome, subjecting the Eternal City to devastating destruction. That sack was not merely a military disaster. It was the death knell of the Renaissance spirit. The Roman Church would never regain its cultural openness and self-confidence. Meanwhile, the discovery of new sea routes delivered a fatal blow to Italy. Europe's economic center of gravity shifted from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. Venetian and Genoese merchantmen were eclipsed by the ocean-going fleets of Portugal and Spain. Italy, once Europe's economic heart, dwindled into a marginalized, impoverished cousin. By 1559, Spain had established control over most of Italy through the Treaty of Cateau Cambresis. Here we must briefly examine the ruling Spanish dynasty, the Spanish Habsburgs. The Habsburgs' dominion over Spain began not with a war, but with a meticulously orchestrated political marriage. The House of Habsburg originated in 11th century Alsace, Switzerland, and rose from a local comital family to one of Europe's most powerful dynasties through successive political marriages and inheritances. Their family motto, interpreted as "Austria is destined to rule the world," clearly proclaimed their ambitions. The Spanish Habsburg branch was a classic case of conquering by marriage. In 1496, Philip the Handsome, heir to the Habsburgs and son of Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, married Joanna, daughter of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. But when Joanna's brother and her sister's children died in quick succession, the direct Spanish royal line was broken, and Joanna unexpectedly became heiress to the Spanish throne. In 1504, Isabella first died. To secure power, Ferdinand II publicly declared his daughter mad, claiming she was unfit to rule. Her husband, Philip conspired with his father-in-law to use Joanna's madness to undermine her authority. Philip died suddenly in 1506, and Joanna's father continued to hold her captive. After Ferdinand II's death in 1516, her son succeeded to the throne the future Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, Carlos I of Spain. Yet even he never released her. Joanna remained queen in name, but a prisoner in reality, until her death in captivity in 1555. All Spanish kingdoms now definitively passed to the Habsburgs. Charles V reigned from 1516 to 1556, inheriting Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, the Netherlands, southern Italy, and the American colonies, thus creating a vast Habsburg empire. In 1556, he abdicated and divided his colossal realm into two branches: the Spanish Habsburgs, led by his son Philip II, Spain and its overseas possessions, and the Austrian Habsburgs, led by his brother Ferdinand I, Austria and the imperial crown. The Spanish Habsburgs ruled over Spain, the Spanish Netherlands, southern Italy, and the Americas from 1516 to 1700. Due to relentless intermarriage, genetic degeneration set in. The dynasty finally ended in 1700 with the death of Charles II, and the Spanish throne passed to the French House of Bourbon. For 2 centuries, Naples, Sicily, Sardinia, and the Duchy of Milan became Spanish dominions. Genoa and Rome, though nominally independent, fell under Spanish influence. Italy was now effectively a Spanish satellite. Over these 2 centuries, the peninsula was carved up like a repeatedly sliced cake. The Spanish held the south, the Austrians controlled the north, the Pope sat in the middle, and the Duchy of Savoy, later the Kingdom of Sardinia, survived in the northwest corner, shielded by the Alps. The Italians had no country of their own, only the double yoke of foreign rulers and local aristocrats. This fragmentation persisted until the arrival of Napoleon at the end of the 18th century. Station 2, Napoleon's unexpected gift: how the French invasion ignited Italian national sentiment. In 1796, a young general from Corsica crossed the Alps at the head of a French army and swept across the Italian peninsula. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. On the surface, Napoleon's invasion brought yet another round of war and pillage, but he also did something unexpected. He toppled the old feudal regimes, the Papal States, the Kingdom of Naples, the Venetian Republic, and replaced them with a series of French-style republics. Yet Napoleon's arrangements in Italy went much further. In 1805, at Milan's Sant'Ambrogio Basilica, he crowned himself King of Italy, placing on his head the ancient iron crown of the Lombard kings and uttering the historically ironic oath, "God has given me this crown, woe to him who touches it." He did not entrust the Italian throne to his brother Joseph Bonaparte, who had refused it, but instead appointed his stepson, Eugene de Beauharnais, as Viceroy of Italy. Eugene, the son of Napoleon's wife Josephine, proved loyal and capable. After Austerlitz, the Kingdom of Italy gained Venice and continued to expand. Napoleon imposed the Napoleonic Code on Italy, sweeping away feudalism, establishing an honor system, and creating a royal guard. Though his Kingdom of Italy was but a French satellite, essentially a forward bastion against Austria, and a source of manpower and resources, it accelerated the transition from local loyalties to an Italian national identity. For the first time, the Italian bourgeoisie tasted the fruits of a modern state. After Napoleon's fall in 1815, the Congress of Vienna redrew the map of Europe. Italy was once again partitioned. Most of the north fell under Austrian control, the Papal States were restored, and the Bourbon Kingdom of the Two Sicilies was revived in the south. The old order seemed to have returned in full force, making unification appear more remote than ever. Yet the seeds of nationalism that Napoleon had sown had already taken root. Italians would not forget the taste of liberty and unity they had once known. Station 3, the Carbonari and Young Italy secret societies kindle the flame. Since open unification was blocked, Italians turned to underground movements. In the early 19th century, a mysterious secret society, the Carbonari, charcoal burners, arose in southern Italy. The name carried symbolic weight. The charcoal burners were seen as refiners and transmitters of liberty, morality, and progress. They used a secret hierarchical structure, complex initiation rituals, signs, passwords, and codes, and adopted a blue, red, and black flag representing hope, virtue, and faith. Their motto was freedom, equality, fraternity, independence, unity. The Carbonari launched repeated uprisings. In Macerata, June 1817, in Naples, July 1820, which briefly forced King Ferdinand I to grant a constitution, in Salento, June 1828, and in Bologna and Modena, February 1831. Except for the brief success of the 1820 Neapolitan Revolt, all were crushed. Why did Carbonari fail so often? They lacked a unified political program. Their military conspiracies were confined to the army and a small elite, without mobilizing the masses, and they relied on foreign support while being riven by factions and divergent views. The real turning point came with Giuseppe Mazzini himself, a former Carbonaro. In 1831, he founded Young Italy, whose program was far more radical, a unified, democratic Italian republic. Mazzini not only called for the overthrow of foreign rulers, but also demanded the abolition of all monarchies, including the Pope's temporal power. His slogan, God and the People, fused national liberation with religious faith, inspiring a whole generation of young Italian intellectuals. Young Italy enforced strict membership criteria. Members had to be under 40, mostly from the middle class and intelligentsia. They established secret cells in many Italian cities, and membership swelled to over 50,000. Between 1833 and 1845, they launched multiple armed revolts in Piedmont, Savoy, and the Papal States, all of which ultimately failed. Yet despite these defeats, Young Italy spread democratic and republican ideals, leaving a lasting mark on the national liberation movement. Mazzini was the spiritual father of the Risorgimento, but he had a fatal flaw. He believed that the insurrection itself would awaken the people. Time and again, his uprisings were easily crushed by Austrian troops. Unification could not be achieved by idealism alone, it would require more realistic means. Station 4. Cavour and the Kingdom of Sardinia, the architect of unification. By the mid-19th century, it was the small northwestern kingdom of Sardinia, Piedmont Sardinia, that eventually shouldered the banner of unification. But why Sardinia? Sardinia was a monarchy ruled by the House of Savoy, with its heartland in the Piedmont region and its capital in Turin. The Savoy dynasty, originating in the 11th century, had ruled the Duchy of Savoy, expanded into the Holy Roman Empire, and after acquiring Sardinia in 1720 through the Treaty of London, formally established the Kingdom of Sardinia. Following Napoleon's fall, the Congress of Vienna granted Sardinia most of the Republic of Genoa, enlarging its territory to the northwest corner of the peninsula. Yet compared to Austria, France, or Spain, Sardinia was still a mid-sized state, far weaker than the former republics of Venice and Genoa. What made it the core of the unification movement was, above all, that it was the only independent Italian kingdom ruled by an Italian dynasty. Most of the peninsula lay under foreign control. Austria directly governed Lombardy and Venetia, and installed pro-Austrian rulers in Tuscany, Modena, and elsewhere. The Papal States were ruled by the Pope, and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, though nominally independent, was rotten with Bourbon absolutism. Sardinia was the sole independent state with a native ruling house, its own army, and its own laws. In 1848, under the pressure of European revolutions, King Charles Albert of Sardinia granted a liberal constitution, establishing a constitutional monarchy. Though Charles Albert was defeated in the war against Austria and abdicated, the constitution was never abolished. It survived all the way to Italian unification. Sardinia was the only state on the peninsula with a constitution, making it a natural refuge for liberals and nationalists. More importantly, Sardinia produced a shrewd, calculating politician who excelled at balancing foreign powers, Count Camillo Benso di Cavour. As Prime Minister of Sardinia, Cavour was the brain of the unification movement. He knew that Sardinia alone could never defeat Austria. It had to use external forces. Through masterful diplomacy, he brought France on Sardinia's side. Cavour's logic was simple. If Sardinia wanted to unify Italy, it had to persuade the great powers that a unified Italy served their interests or at least did not harm them. Cavour himself was a fascinating figure. He came from a distinguished noble family. The Cavours had held a marquisate since 1649. Yet before entering politics, he managed a farm on the outskirts of Turin, experimenting with agricultural improvements. Who would have thought that this farm manager, poking around in fertilizers, would become the mastermind of Italian unification? His agrarian background perfectly shaped his practical, calculating style. He ran the state as he had run his farm, calculating inputs and outputs, weighing the value of allies, and measuring every gain and loss. As prime minister, Cavour pushed through a series of modernizing reforms, overhauling the tax system, building railways and ports, fostering industry and commerce, lowering tariffs, and promoting free trade. He wanted not a grand revolution, but a powerful state one capable of fighting, negotiating, and eventually unifying. In 1858, Cavour met Napoleon III secretly at the French town of Plombières. He agreed to cede Savoy and Nice, the ancestral homeland of the House of Savoy, to France in return for French military support against Austria. Selling the cradle of his dynasty for aid may seem humiliating today, but Cavour did not care. He wanted a united Italy, not personal pride or family tombs. In 1859, the Franco-Sardinian forces attacked Austria and won a series of victories. But Napoleon III, seeing the momentum of Italian nationalism exceeding his control and fearing that a united Italy would become a southern European power threatening France secretly, concluded a separate peace with Austria. Cavour was so outraged that he resigned on the spot. His use France to defeat Austria plan had been betrayed by the French themselves. Sardinia gained only Lombardy. Venice remained in Austrian hands. Station 5, Garibaldi's Expedition of the Thousand, How One Man Changed a Nation's Destiny. Just as Cavour's diplomatic plan was bogged down, a legendary figure stepped forward: Giuseppe Garibaldi. Garibaldi was the most romantic hero of the Risorgimento. Exiled in South America in his youth, he learned guerrilla warfare there. His red-cloaked, bushy-bearded image became a living icon of Italian nationalism. In April 1860, a mass uprising broke out in Sicily. Garibaldi decided to raise volunteers to aid the insurgents. Cavour dismissed the venture as a madman's business, but Garibaldi went ahead anyway, recruiting over 1,000 volunteers, mostly workers, artisans, fishermen, revolutionary intellectuals, and foreign supporters. Without weapons from Sardinia, they armed themselves. On May 6th, this 1,000-strong force set sail from Quarto near Genoa in 2 ships, landing at Marsala in western Sicily on May 10th. You might wonder, how could a motley crowd of 1,000 men defeat the Bourbon Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which boasted 93,000 troops and a formidable navy? To understand this seemingly impossible victory, we must first understand the dynasty they were up against. The Kingdom of the Two Sicilies was an ancient state covering the entire southern half of the peninsula, including Naples and Sicily, the largest and most populous state in pre-unification Italy. Its rulers came from the French House of Bourbon, a branch of Europe's most illustrious dynasty, which had split into Spanish and Neapolitan Sicilian lines. The Neapolitan branch was known as the Bourbon Two Sicilies. Recognized at the Congress of Vienna after Napoleon's fall, the kingdom was ruled first by Ferdinand I, then by Francis I, 1825 to 1830. Their reigns had been relatively stable, but from the start, Bourbon absolutism carried the seeds of crisis. By 1860, after decades of misrule, the dynasty had lost popular support, and the last king was precisely the wrong man to face the storm. Francis II was born on January 16, 1836, in the royal palace of Naples. He was the only child of Ferdinand II and his first wife, Princess Maria Cristina of Savoy, who died just 2 weeks after his birth. A year later, his father married the Austrian Archduchess Maria Theresa Isabella. Francis was severely neglected in his education. Though given a strict moral and religious upbringing, he received almost no political or military training. He grew up gentle and kind, but timid, suspicious, and weak, easily dominated by his overbearing stepmother both at court and in family councils. It was his father, Ferdinand II, who truly dragged the kingdom to ruin. At first, Ferdinand II had introduced moderate reforms and was even seen by some Italian nationalists as a potential leader of unification. But over time, he grew increasingly conservative and despotic. In 1848, forced by revolutionary pressure to grant a liberal constitution, he reneged within months and sent troops to bombard Messina, a stronghold of the resistance. The massacre shocked Europe and earned him the nickname King Bomba. Ferdinand also rejected railways, fearing that they would facilitate the invasion of northern revolutionaries, a telling sign of his own insecurity. Diplomatically, he was virtually isolated. Though Austria was his traditional ally, his repression of the 1848 revolution soured relations with Britain and France. Britain even withdrew its diplomatic representative from Naples. In 1856, Britain and France tried to win him over during the Crimean War, but Ferdinand refused, cutting the last ties with the Western powers. By the time he died in 1859, the Two Sicilies was a backward, isolated, and absolutist state. It was this legacy that Francis II inherited. He lacked his father's iron will but inherited his obstinacy. He wanted to avoid conflict, but did not know how to compromise with the tide of history. An inexperienced young man, he now faced a decrepit dynasty about to be swept away forever. Why, then, did Garibaldi win? First, Garibaldi possessed extraordinary charisma and tactical skill. His hallmark was the continuous offensive, giving the enemy no respite. He had learned guerrilla warfare in South America and applied it brilliantly. He never engaged in frontal battles, but used terrain and speed to fight a fluid war. The first crucial engagement came at Calatafimi on May 15th, where Garibaldi's 800 men defeated a 3,000-strong Neapolitan force. The victory spread his legend across the kingdom, demoralizing the royal troops. Second, the red shirts were welcomed by the local population. Everywhere they went, volunteers flocked to their banner, and local insurgents joined them. Garibaldi wisely never lingered, but kept advancing inland. Within months, his force had swollen from 1,000 to 25,000. Third, Francis II's position was hopeless. He was only 24, politically inexperienced, weak-willed, and widely despised. His kingdom was diplomatically isolated. Britain was hostile over sulfur trading issues. Spain, Austria, and Russia offered only lip service. And his father's legacy of estrangement from the Western powers left him without a single reliable ally. Garibaldi's expedition exploited this window of opportunity. By the end of May, the redshirts had taken Palermo. In July, Garibaldi controlled all of Sicily. In August, he crossed the Strait of Messina to the mainland. On September 7th, Naples fell. Within 6 months, a volunteer force of about 1,000 men had overthrown a kingdom of 100,000 soldiers. On February 13th, 1861, the last Bourbon stronghold at Gaeta surrendered, and Francis II fled to Rome, eventually settling in Austria, where he lived out the rest of his life. After conquering the south, Garibaldi faced a crucial choice. He could have proclaimed himself king or established a republic. Instead, he made an astonishing decision. He handed over all the conquered territories to King Victor Emmanuel II of Sardinia. Why? First, Garibaldi was a fervent nationalist. His ultimate goal was not personal power but a united Italy. He wanted not a crown, but a complete border on the map. Second, Garibaldi felt a personal loyalty to Victor Emmanuel II, who had become a symbol of the national cause. He believed that only by giving the south to Sardinia could unification be achieved quickly and a fratricidal struggle between republicans and monarchists be avoided. Though Garibaldi had once followed Mazzini's republicanism, he was willing to accept a monarchy if it delivered a unified Italy. In November 1860, the South was formally incorporated into the Kingdom of Sardinia. Garibaldi sent a one-word telegram: "Obbedisco, I obey." He then resigned all offices and returned to his small farm on the island of Caprera. He refused all honors, titles, and money. Victor Emmanuel had sent a generous gift list, but Garibaldi would not touch it. He had never wanted power, only unity. On March 17, 1861, the Kingdom of Sardinia was officially renamed the Kingdom of Italy, and Victor Emmanuel II became its king. Cavour, the architect of unification, died only 3 months later, aged just 51. Station 6. The final dash: the annexation of Rome and Venice. Unification was still incomplete in 1861. Venice remained in Austrian hands, and Rome was still under papal control, protected by French troops. To understand why Venice was so hard to recover from, we need to grasp the great 19th century rivalry between Prussia and Austria. The Holy Roman Empire had been dissolved, and in its place the German Confederation was a loose grouping dominated by the dualism of Prussia and Austria. Austria advocated a greater German solution, incorporating all Austrian lands into a united Germany. Prussia championed a lesser German solution, excluding Austria and uniting Germany under Prussian leadership. In 1850, Prussia had been humiliated at Olmütz and forced to bow to Austria, a humiliation that festered for years. In 1862, Bismarck became Prussian prime minister. He was determined to cut the Gordian knot with blood and iron. "The question of the German states," he declared, "cannot be solved by sentimental dualism, only by the sword." But Bismarck knew that Prussia could not fight Austria alone. He had to secure the neutrality of France, Russia, and Italy. His diplomacy was masterful. On April 8, 1866, Prussia and Italy signed a secret alliance. If Italy supported Prussia against Austria, it would receive Venetia after the war. This was exactly what Italy wanted. Bismarck also exploited Russia's resentment over Austria's neutrality during the Crimean War, ensuring Russian non-intervention. He then made vague promises to Napoleon III about lands west of the Rhine, keeping France neutral. With all pieces in place, Bismarck needed only a pretext for war. In 1864, Prussia and Austria had jointly fought Denmark and then jointly administered the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. In 1866, Bismarck deliberately provoked a dispute over Austrian-administered Holstein. Austria appealed to the German Confederation, and most German states sided with Austria. In June 1866, the Austro-Prussian War broke out, lasting only 7 weeks, hence the 7 Weeks' War. The result was astonishing. The Prussian army, equipped with superior breech-loading rifles, the Dreyse needle gun, and directed by Moltke's brilliant railway-based mobilization, crushed the Austrian main force at Königgrätz, Sadova. Prussia became the dominant power in Germany, and Austria's leadership ended forever. Italy, honoring its alliance, declared war on Austria on June 20th and advanced on Venetia. On October 3, 1866, the Treaty of Vienna concluded the war and the Third Italian War of Independence. Under its terms, Austria ceded Venetia to Italy. After so many years, Italy had finally regained Venice. The hardest bone was Rome. Pope Pius IX stubbornly clung to temporal power, and Napoleon III maintained French troops to protect him, partly because Napoleon needed the support of French Catholics, and he would not allow the Pope to lose his secular authority. But in 1870, the Franco-Prussian War broke out, forcing Napoleon to withdraw his troops from Rome. Italian forces moved in. In 1871, Rome was proclaimed the capital of Italy. The Pope withdrew to the Vatican, refusing to recognize the new kingdom, a breach that would not be healed until 1929. Thus, Italian unification was finally complete. Counting from the Congress of Vienna, it had taken exactly 56 years. Station 7. A pseudo-great power. Why was Italy a paper tiger? Though united, Italy faced no shortage of challenges. Economically, it lagged far behind Britain, France, and Germany. According to 1861 statistics, the Industrialist North Liguria, Lombardy, and Veneto held a little over a third of the population, but generated 3/4 of the national income and 5/6 of industrial output. The South lacked minerals and infrastructure, and most of its people lived off agriculture. The centralized government aggravated the severe North-South economic imbalance. Between 1861 and 1865, the South was rocked by the so-called brigandage crisis. Peasant revolts ruthlessly suppressed, while heavy taxation and the introduction of conscription further alienated the Southern peasantry. Politically, Italy was a constitutional monarchy, but its parliament was corrupt, its governments unstable and short-lived, hardly comparable to stable Britain or powerful Germany. Socially, Italians had for centuries identified as Venetians, Neapolitans, or Tuscans. The notion of being Italian was still foreign to most. Cavour's famous dictum captured the dilemma. We have created Italy, now we must create Italians. Consequently, Italy was widely regarded as the weakest of the great powers. Some even mocked it as a pseudo-great power. It might sit at the great power table, but it always ate leftovers. Eager to prove its great power credentials, Italy joined the colonial scramble. In 1885 to 1896, it invaded Ethiopia, only to be crushingly defeated at Adwa, a rare humiliation for a European power in Africa and a devastating blow to Italian pride. In 1911 to 1912, it fought the Ottoman Empire and took Libya, salvaging some prestige. Diplomatically, Italy was in an impossible position. Its deepest resentment was directed at Austria, its longtime occupier of northern Italian lands, and its persistent opponent during unification. Yet Italy also feared France, whose Mediterranean and North African ambitions threatened Italian interests. On May 20, 1882, Italy made a pragmatic but deeply contradictory choice. It joined the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary. It did so out of fear it needed a powerful ally against France. Yet the alliance included its archenemy. A contemporary joke quipped, Italy allied with Austria to avoid fighting Austria. When the First World War broke out in 1914, Italy faced a treaty dilemma. The Triple Alliance was defensive, obligating members to aid one another only if attacked. This war had been provoked by Austria-Hungary's aggression against Serbia, falling outside the alliance's defensive scope. Italy therefore declared neutrality. Over the next year, it struck a classic hedging bargain. The Entente offered Italy generous territorial rewards: Trentino, Trieste, the Istrian Peninsula, and parts of Dalmatia territories it regarded as unredeemed. On April 26, 1915, Italy secretly signed the Treaty of London. On May 23rd, it declared war on Austria-Hungary, formally betraying the Triple Alliance. As one cynic put it, Italy's loyalty goes to the highest bidder. Lord Palmerston's famous dictum, "Great Britain has no permanent allies, only permanent interests," might have been written with Italy in mind. Final station, a nation's birth woven from humiliation and glory. Reviewing Italy's journey from the Renaissance ruins to the eve of the Great War, we see all the pain of a belated birth. It had once been the beacon of European civilization, yet after the Renaissance it fell prey to great power ambitions. It had been divided for over a millennium, yet within half a century it achieved unification. It had been crushed under foreign heels, yet through the relay of idealists and realists it rose again. But after unification, Italy was haunted by the anxiety of a latecomer. It was desperate to prove itself a great power, yet lacked the substance of one. It wavered in its foreign policy because it could neither stomach being bullied nor stand alone against any major power. This painful predicament defined Italy's diplomatic waffling before the Great War. It stayed neutral at the war's outbreak, then betrayed its allies after being promised territorial, driven by the survival logic of a weak state caught between giants. It was not a glorious choice, but it was the one that best served Italian interests. That pragmatic streak has, to some extent, continued to this day. A nation's birth is never just about drawing a line on a map. It requires the simultaneous construction of economic foundations, social cohesion, and international standing, and in 1870, Italy lacked all three. Yet nothing can diminish the enduring charm, fashion, art, splendid landscapes, warm people, and endless gastronomy of this land. It still carries the faint breath of ancient Rome. Thank you for joining me on this journey from the ruins of the Renaissance to Italian unification. By studying history, we understand the rise and fall of nations. Please subscribe and leave your comments. I am Lawrence Stardust. See you next time.